Jo, I don't even know where to begin.
Topic. It's a big topic.
Hi, everyone. Vicki and Jo here with you today on the Tabwoo podcast. And we've been wanting to have this conversation outside of the Tabwoo Institute student body for a really long time. And today's the day. I want to share before we even begin with this topic that this is a prioritized teaching within the core method that we teach our transformational arts practitioners. It's really important, and you're going to learn why. So stick around. We're going to jam for the next half hour on why it's so damn important to expect people to cope, to be responsible for their own experience, to have some level of emotional intelligence and self-agency, sovereignty. I think it's, at the end of the day, the umbrella of this topic is to trust people to be sovereign in their own right. So we're going to chunk it down now and distill the conversation into what are you referring to, Vicki? And the two pillars that we're going to talk about right now are what is pathogenesis versus salutogenesis. And Jo is in my mind, an expert on these topics, discerning the difference of them. And I'm going to be asking you, Jo, all the questions about what is this and why is it so damn important? You good?
Yeah, I'm ready. We've been talking about this for like such a long time. It's been like a year at least.
Exactly. So let's roll. First of all, define pathogenesis and salutogenesis for us whilst differentiating them at the same time. What are these terms?
Yeah, so pathogenesis is essentially, it stems from this focus of dysfunction and how it develops, or disease and how disease develops. And it's essentially problem focused, right? The question that pathogenesis asks is what's wrong with you, versus salutogenesis, which is really the genuine meaning of like being holistic, right? Because we're looking at all the parts, all the pieces, all the different areas, and we're not believing that anything exists in a vacuum, right? Something in this area of life will affect us in all other areas of life. And so looking through that lens, it's more we're asking the question, what is supporting you to thrive, basically? And we're not avoiding problems. That's not what this is about. It's not the avoidance of things or the absence of dysfunction. It's really just about how can we get you from where you are right now to where you would like to be, right? Whether, in your fortitude, in your mental strength, your physical strength, your emotional strength and intelligence. And so it's just genuinely helping us to learn about ourselves, our internal world. And so the way I like to kind of describe it is like with pathogens, I mean, of course, there's going to be times where it's necessary, right? Like if you bash your arm and it's bleeding and you need stitches, like, yeah, pathogenesis is good, is the key, right? Because it's like, what's going on? What's wrong? All right, we're gonna do stitches. You're all good. But when that's the view always, because that's really the underlying thing of pathogenesis, is once I've addressed this problem, I'm considering it fixed.
You're fixed. Yeah, you're done. It's not broken anymore. Continue on.
Yeah. So you can see that there's ways where that is the correct approach and ways where it absolutely isn't. So it's a big topic, and it's woven throughout so many different industries. It's not just coaching, it's not just health care and those types of practitioners. It's throughout, like law
Give us
enforcement.
give us another example off the top of your head. Another example of pathogenesis played out in an industry that's not necessarily healthcare.
Good question. So, I mean, sorry, I'm trying to think of exactly how I can define this, but, and this could go a multitude of ways, but like, for example, with legalities of things, right? We have laws, and there's federal laws and there's state laws and blah, blah, blah. So but burden of proof comes into all of this. So it's a little bit of a different story, but the idea really is we're only going to look at this. This is the key thing we're looking at right here. This situation wherein you are perceived to have broken a law. And that's what we're going to focus on. So like I said, of course, like I said, burden of proof kind of comes into that. I'm not a lawyer, but you know what I'm saying? like I know enough to sort of at least give that much of an example. But it can be really focused on the problem versus the solution.
What about in the coaching industry? Give us an example there.
Yeah, for sure. So I think the biggest one that I often see is really all about oh God. So there's so many examples I can think of, and I'm trying to narrow it down to a good one. But I think really the this sort of idea that and not always necessarily like, oh, I'm the guru of blah blah blah, but there's a lot of focus on, well, this is this type of response, this is a trauma response, and this is a a scarcity mindset, and this is we're putting all these labels on these different behaviors, and there's a modicum of truth to some of this, but like it's also sort of assuming that everyone is traumatized, that everyone is dysfunctional, that right, just based on these little behaviors or these things that we might do that maybe don't correlate to this dysfunction or that trauma response. So there's nuance to all of it, but or cherry picking certain things where we're just looking at the law of attraction, for example, because that's a big one, right? Where we're like, well, if you just did this and this and this and this, right? And it's like, well, okay, anyway.
Just transmute your limiting beliefs,
right,
and think the positive thoughts, and imagine having those experiences and emotions that give you the circumstance that you're dreaming of. If we just focus on that, then that'll fix the problem.
Right.
Just eradicate limiting beliefs. It's fixed.
Yeah. Or that it's only a mindset thing, or that it's only emotional thing. So when we're only looking at one part of the issue, like without looking at all of it, that's where I think we're on a slippery slope.
So the holistic approach could be another term for the salutogenesis genic approach, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So if we were viewing the healthcare, coaching, legal industries through pathogenesis, you've given those examples, helps us to understand it more. What if we approach it through the lens of salutogenesis? What does it look like instead, and why is that preferable?
So at that point, it looks like, that we're helping people to advocate for themselves. That's distilled. That's really what it comes down to. So whether we're, what I see, coming back to just for a second, like another bit of the pathogenesis sort of thread is this sort of like infantilized and feebled, like, oh, I have to be so fragile with you, and everyone has to be fragile with you because you're, and right, like that doesn't help
Like,
people.
trigger warning, I'm about to say
Right.
something that might accidentally trigger you and I don't mean to, sorry.
Right. And it's like, well, why are we assuming that on anybody? That's not
Yeah.
okay either.
Yeah. What if I'm responsible for my own responses and reactions? What if I have enough emotional mental strength to see that thread or post or statement and identify if it's going to trigger me or not? That's my responsibility as
Right.
far as I'm concerned. And I'm going to go off on a tangent. It's a
Yeah.
little bit of a soapbox here. I distrust people who share trigger warnings first.
Okay.
I'm like, what? So you don't trust me to receive this information with emotional mental intelligence? Are you serious? I don't even want to know what you're writing right now. Like,
Yeah.
if you're already approaching me as your reader with that, I'm going to go and read someone else who's not so afraid to speak to things, content creators who trust me to be responsible for my own response or reaction. Because what if I do get quote unquote triggered by something?
Yeah.
That's on me.
Right. It is our responsibility. And that kind of is where salutogenesis comes in, of like, I'm not going to baby you, I'm not going to infantilize you or treat you like you're, broken or damaged or dysfunctional. um
You're
I'm
gonna,
gonna be like a human being. And
yeah, you're gonna see me as being capable of being my own advocate, capable of keeping myself safe. You're gonna trust me to know what I'm doing and what I'm reading and how to keep myself regulated. Or if I feel dysregulated, you're going to have faith in me and trust me to be able to manage that.
right. Right. And that's another kind of situation too, of like, in particular around coaching, or even other practitioners in the healthcare industry as well. Because, by the way, I just want to preface this with, just because you have a degree or those three letters after your name does not exempt you from this conversation. Like, they're the professionals, so to speak, are doing harm as well. And so I think it's an important conversation to have. So salutogenesis requires us as well to like discover the root cause of things. Right. So let me give you an odd medical example, but it's the best one I can kind of think of. Like, you have high blood pressure, right? Your doctor's probably going to prescribe you whatever. I don't know. I don't know what they prescribe for high blood
Blood
pressure.
pressure pills. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. What, I don't know any like brands, but right. They're gonna prescribe you one or more medications. Um, but they're not going to figure out, well, why? Why is your blood pressure so high? What, where's that coming from? Right? There's no incentive for them to do that. And so with salutogenesis, though, we're like, okay, so this is what's going on. Here's the options that are clear right now. And while you pick one of those, we're also going to be working on figuring out where this
Mm.
actually stems from, so that we can put you on a path of being congruent, and in whatever way that looks like. And I know that's a health example, but you know what I mean. Like,
Yeah. And we also know that there's integrative medicine, just like there's integrated coaching, where the holistic view is a primary lens that they view things from. So there are practitioners who are viewing things from that lens. So I wanted to like clarify, Joe's not talking about all healthcare practitioners, right? Would just prescribe you. There is an integrated approach, integrated medicine, where we look at all the reasons for something playing out
yeah,
for the purpose of, let's help you to thrive.
yeah,
Let's prevent the high blood pressure or the reaction, or that, not that you want to like strive to prevent dysregulation or incoherence because we are human and that is going to be a part of it. However, in having those conversations, whether we are having them for ourselves or with friends, family, professionals, we start to gather tools on how to co-regulate with all of those systems in our body, to trust ourselves to be able to come back to our home frequency, our natural equalized state of being. Salutogenesis, I didn't even know the term before I met you, Jo. It is probably what I would have termed integrative or holistic approach in the past. Yet it's more than that, isn't it?
It is. And it's interesting because you're right. Like, there are definitely practitioners who that is their approach, like the holistic approach is their approach. But if they're well, at least where I've been, and where I've lived, and what I saw in my 10 years working in healthcare, like, they're not mainstream. A lot of times they're not covered by insurance. So you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just funny. But yeah, I do think that salutogenesis goes a little further than holistic because it really requires the practitioner to remove a lot of what might be conscious biases or cognitive biases. So we as practitioners have to really be in our own sort of what's the word, like nervous system. We have to have nervous system flexibility.
Nice.
And we have to also understand, like, not everybody thinks like I do. So I can absolutely choose to specifically work with this type of person or people who behave and believe and act in these ways. I also know that I'm not always going to encounter that, right? And on that token, those encounters with people who might be challenging, they're helping us achieve more nervous system flexibility, right? Because we have to
and broadening our worldviews, and practicing compassion and empathy,
Yeah.
Okay, so can we talk to, now that we've identified and given examples of pathogenesis and salutogenesis and how it goes further than holistic approach, cognitive bias.
Mm-hmm.
Can we go there and have that conversation of what is that and why would we want to be aware of that? What does it look like when we're not aware of it?
Yeah. So I mean, there's not just one specific cognitive bias. I mean, there's so many of them, right? There's different types, we've got confirmation bias, for example, that's a one, and we're, again, some of these things are unconscious. We don't always recognize that we're doing them. Some things are definitely cognitive, and that maybe stems from how we grew up. I mean, there's a myriad of factors where these things come from. So I'm not here to say that like any of this is bad, right? It just is what it is. And the key here is recognizing when it's happening. So when we are enacting in a bias, let's just say, we typically tend to, that really colors how we interact with people, right? Like I was saying, confirmation bias, for example, like we're only looking for the things that confirm what we already believe. So when we run into something that maybe disconfirms that or is different from what we believe, then it's like, right? and as well, like I've been studying cults for a hot minute and I love that so much. But that is like that is literally something that you see in cults as well, right? The dissent is bad. So it is this bubble or it's nothing. And if you hear the dissenting opinion or the differing opinion, like cover your ears then, and So we have a harder time sometimes in being able to navigate those situations wherein there is this difference, or there is this kind of like, oh, we don't quite see eye to eye. And this is a whole other topic of conversation, but agreement and understanding are two different things, and they're not necessarily like, I don't need agreement in order to understand you. I can understand you and disagree with you, and still be civil and treat you like a human being and have that be okay.
And still be family and friends with
Right.
one another
Yeah.
if that is the case. Yeah, I don't have to agree with what my friend shares. There is still the ability for me to have compassion and respect, and what you're saying, to have nervous system flexibility, to be willing to broaden my worldviews
Right.
and to hold space for the other's opinion.
Yeah. And so it's when we get dogmatic about it that we're really like operating in those biases, right? We're threatened in some way because this goes against what I believe, what my morals are, what my ideology is, which ideology informs our morals, what my values are. And and I think that dehumanizing people who believe different, or behave different, or make different choices than we do, um and stepping into this like moral superiority, like that's not the answer either. Like at all. That's not how we help people grow.
Uh-uh. So my question is, and this is also, by the way, a big topic of conversation that we have inside of the Minecrafting
Yeah.
certification course inside of Tabwoo. So if we're identifying that we have biases, whether we're hopping on someone else's bandwagon, or feeling judged because we have different values than another, or we see someone else as being wrong because that's not how we were taught, or whatever it is, whatever your bias might be, if we recognize that if we recognize that we're operating from those biases, what do we do? How can we expand our worldview? How can we be even just simply a little bit more self-aware of that, so
Yeah, and
that we're
awareness.
not bad and they're not bad? How do we be not necessarily neutral on that? Because we don't want to, like, I don't know, we don't want to not validate our values. Like, what we believe is still very important,
Yeah.
and I want to hold on to that. And how do I also leave space for the other?
um Detachment, I think, is a good way. I didn't expect that answer to come up first, but but it's true, because I think that like we can absolutely feel like what our beliefs and our values and our morals are important. They're important to us. They're, a big part of our foundation, as people. Um and by not standing in this place of like self-righteousness, this is the only way to think, the only way to be or believe, um helps us to develop more of that flexibility, but also curiosity, right? Why do you believe what you believe? And having
Yeah.
a genuinely curious attitude versus like, well, why do you believe that? Like,
And also, why do I believe that? So, for example, if I'm going to bring up a personal example. When my wife and I were engaged, we were thinking about how our wedding would look like, right? Like, would we be the two brides who walk up the aisle with our parents on either side in white dresses? Like, what if that was a thing? First of all, when I was growing up, imagining my wedding day, I didn't think that it was possible to have a bride. Like, that wasn't even a thing, right? Or a wife. I thought that I'd be walking up in my white dress, and that was something that I believe society had taught me to do.
Mhm.
So when same-sex marriage became legal in New Zealand, where we live, and this was a possibility now, we questioned everything. We're
Yeah.
like, so why would I think that it's important to wear a white dress? Is that actually a belief that or a value that I hold? And can I question that for a moment? Can I be curious about whether that's still a value that lands well within me and for my future wife? We did decide to walk up the aisle in white dresses, by the way. We went dress shopping together. You don't get to do that with your husband, do you, or your future husband? So it's asking ourselves the questions of, why is it that I hold on to this value anyway? And asking, oh, I wonder why that person has that value as well.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful opportunity to get curious and either fortify our own beliefs and values and what's right for us, at the same time as expand our capacity to understand and have compassion and respect for the other, especially when that's polarizing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I like it's important to look at it, I think, from that perspective. Because I mean, we see a lot of things on social media and people calling other people out, and it's like, I'm not fucking here to call anybody out. Like, I'm not the accountability police. None of us are. And like, that's not the point. The point is to help people support them in being able to identify the things that maybe don't sit right, or to support them in advocating for themselves, or looking for, the type of support in whatever way that they need, whether it's a coach or a therapist or whatever. So I think it's silly. And I'm gonna sit here and be like, I'm gonna call all these people out, and like, now you have to explain yourself. Like, we're fucking adults. Come on. Like,
Right? Like, let's get solution focused.
right. And again, like, isn't that a little bit of pathogenesis as well? Of like, well, there's only this one way, and now you need to explain yourself, and you have to explain yourself to me. And like, well, who died and made you judge, jury, and execution? Like,
Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah.
I think it's just like, the problem is always going to be the problem, regardless of what the problem is. So now that we recognize it, maybe let's focus our efforts on creating solutions that are genuinely solutions to the problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
With
then
the
the problem
future in
might just
mind.
go away.
Yeah. With the future in mind,
Yeah.
knowing that we still have to coexist on Earth with people who might have a completely polarizing view to what we do in the world and world events and politics, education system, like parenting, like name all the things. By the way, what if we disagree over here, but we agree over here? Like, is there a ground in which we can see each other in
Right.
and possibly connect with? Like, what if there's another way?
Yeah. Because that's key, isn't it? Right. If variety is the spice of life, why are we trying to make everything so homogenous? Like, we don't need to agree 100% of the time. I feel like that's fucking boring. I don't want an echo chamber. I want to be able to have conversations where we get to talk about why you believe that and why I believe that, and learn from each other. And, oh, you know what, Vicki? Like, I never thought about that perspective. That's a really good point. Like, that's how we learn. That's how we understand. So I think that that, call out culture, cancel culture, all this stuff is, I mean, to me, it's such a waste of time. Right? We could be doing far more constructive things. And I get it. I mean, I do. I understand that where it's coming from, and like, sometimes our good intentions, we can have the best of intentions and still not necessarily behave in a way that is congruent or in integrity with those
Yeah.
because of the cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
Right.
And because every day we're experiencing ourselves in a whole different way, or maybe ways in which we've experienced. What I'm trying to get at is we are human. I'm
Right.
still going to have days where I am hopping on the bandwagon
Sure.
and looking through my day through the lens of I'm broken.
Right.
What is wrong with me? And then try to create a quick fix around that so that it doesn't feel painful.
Mm-hmm.
And other days I'll have the courage to be, I'm whole and complete, yet I'm experiencing this. And with a solution future focused questioning, I can look at that and say, accepting I'm feeling this, I'm experiencing myself as ostracized from that conversation, not wanting to buy into that. Who am I in amongst all of this? Like, what if I have those real courageous days where I stand in my power and I'm like, actually, this is my center and
Mm-hmm.
I'm safe here.
Yeah.
And I'm not getting rattled today because I have my own world to be working with
Yeah.
or enjoying or accepting. Hopefully not feeling like I'm having to heal it, right? Because then I'm going back into pathogenesis where I think I'm broken. Like,
Right. The never-ending hamster wheel of
mhm,
self-improvement and blah blah blah.
every day, minute by minute. Yeah.
Right. Right. And I think that's a good point, because that's a good way to recognize, number one, when we are behaving from maybe a bias, whether cognitive or unconscious, whatever it may be, or even a belief system, right? I mean, because it's not just our biases that shape our behavior, but then we can say, huh, okay, interesting data. What did I do this time? What do I want to do next time? How can and I know that there's some a discord around what I'm about to say, but how can I put myself in situations and trust myself to know when enough is enough? But how can I put myself into situations where I can have an opportunity to behave differently?
Mhm.
Because we can't do differently if we're avoiding, right? Same with trauma, with PTSD, right? Like, we don't heal our nervous system by avoiding the things that dysregulate us. I mean, that's I know that, like, not everybody wants to hear that, but it's literally true.
We get,
Therapists don't work with people on their trauma by avoiding the trauma, right? You have to dig into it, and little bits at a time, right? And recognizing where your threshold is or where your limits are, and but again, recognizing where the opportunities are, where you can say, this is where I can do something different.
because if it doesn't feel good, then there's going to be that spark of, I don't know, inspiration within you. We talked about this on the last episode of, I knew that change needed to occur and that change was occurring because I felt so dark inside.
Mm-hmm.
Yet there was that pilot light within me that sparked inspiration and gave me the indicator that I can make changes from here because
Yeah.
I've now recognized what doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
So even though it takes a lot of courage to put ourselves in circumstances, and some days we're just not up for it. Like, I know some days I'm not going to go to the supermarket, grocery store today because I don't feel as strong as what I could tomorrow when it comes to my social anxiety. There you go, I just named it. When it comes to social anxiety, there are just some days when I know actually staying at home and just being within my close proximity is good for me right now. So
Yeah.
we consciously select the experiences that we know will challenge us for the purpose of, what is it? Creating flexibility, not only with our nervous system, but also within boundaries. It's like, how far can I go into having a conversation with someone and just go to that comfort edge, or maybe, I don't know, get a little bit vulnerable with that person, maybe for the hope that it's going to connect me to the other.
Right.
Like being willing to take that risk, to be vulnerable, to connect, because in this circumstance, in this example that I'm sharing, it's more worthwhile for me to connect and have that experience than it is to avoid social anxiety and stay at home as a hermit, not having any relationships or any encounters that help me to experience myself through the other.
Right.
Ooh. So flexibility, curiosity, there's a lot of resilience required here to recognize how resilient we actually are. It takes courage, it takes self-awareness, compassion, empathy.
Yeah. And I
This is
mean,
how we'd be in the world to a greater degree, right? Sorry for interrupting. Carry on.
no. I mean, it also, like, we might need to step onto that neutrality space as well, in order to like reach a place of empathy or compassion. So neutrality, I think, is also a key ingredient. And it doesn't mean, right, and I think to clarify, and I know I've said this before, but neutrality doesn't mean like the absence of feelings or having an opinion on something or whatever. It just means like I'm just going to be in this like space of observation, and just noticing the things versus reacting or responding to this thing or that thing. And so we can build from neutrality, we can build from tolerance into that place of compassion, because we might not experience compassion or empathy right away around certain things. But again, coming back to this salutogenic approach, like that's what it's going to help us do, is to build on what exists.
So the ultimate reason why we would possibly want to take a salutogenic approach is so that we ourselves can thrive in a world that we support the thriving of. We can also contribute to the conditions that help others to thrive.
Right.
That's the whole fucking reason for all of it. This is why it's so damn important, right?
Yes.
Ultimately,
yeah.
that was a cool little summary. I feel like tied the bow on the conversation. Insane that we are interested in having the conversations and knowing that in this moment we're inviting the other, our audience members, to share and share perspective, comment, throw your reactions or your responses out into the ether so that we can neutrally observe it and see what we would like to do with that information. It's like interesting data. We would love for you literally to share with us the interesting data that you have to share with us. So there are a couple of ways in which you can do that. And Jo, do you want to share that now and then we'll wrap up this episode?
Yeah, so pop into the Telegram Insiders group. We're in there and having the conversations, especially around these podcast topics. You can also, reply to magic@lexidangelo.com and have those conversations with us there. But I think those are the two places where we're most active, in terms of having those daily convos.
Yeah. Okay. I hope that each and every one of you accept this invitation to some degree, whether it's chatting to us, expanding your awareness, being curious about your own values, being courageous enough to consider where the other is coming from, to see your life, if not today, then maybe this week, this next coming year, through the lens of salutogenesis, especially if you are encountering people on the daily. If you are scrolling on the daily, you are encountering people. If you are at all in society in a really active way, we invite you to look at life through this lens and notice how it impacts you. Notice the difference that it makes. Notice how you thrive even more so as a result.
Yep.
All right. So until next time, thank you for tuning in with us. As always, it is our pleasure to be having these conversations, and we will look forward to sharing the next episode and what that might be. Ooh, what would that be? Write in some questions and some requests for topics, and we will work from that. That sounds like fun.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Okay. Right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.